Numerous high-profile cases of alleged hauntings have originated from the British Isles, from the poltergeist activity and demonic possession at Enfield to the unsettling apparitions witnessed at Borley Rectory. But perhaps the most terrifying of these tales is also the least well known. The story of a family terrorised by an evil presence whilst residing in a remote Welsh mountain farmhouse. This week, we explore the curse of Heol Fanog. Amidst the awe and beauty of the Welsh countryside, the Brecon beacons often elicit a seemingly magical effect upon those who venture there. The stunning topography created by the mountain ranges which crisscross this particular region are the setting for many historical tales of enchantment and majesty. It is a landscape that features numerous caves and valleys hidden well away from prying eyes, once believed to have been the home of fairies, giants, and powerful witches. It is a notion which seems to have motivated past invaders into establishing a substantial occupying presence. The Romans in particular were deeply troubled by the Druids when they first settled the region, and ensured that a sizable force was always ready to assert its authority. And whilst as the centuries have passed, such stories of myth and magic have now faded, unsettling and haunting incidents continue to take place. The area is often referred to as an aeroplane graveyard, due to the fact that over 40 aircraft have plummeted from the skies over the mountains. The British Army has faced a concerning number of casualties amongst its servicemen, with fatalities occurring during local training exercises. These stories are, of course, well known to those who reside in and around the beacons. As a result, they treat their surroundings with a cautious respect. But for the many tourists and holidaymakers who visit every year, this is a side to the region that exists in stark contrast to the beauty for which it is so famous. This would certainly be the case for one young family who moved into an isolated farmhouse surrounded by the idyllic views of the beacons during the twilight years of the 1980s. They couldn't have known that what they hoped and believed would be the home of their dreams would ultimately become the stuff of nightmares. The car which came to a halt outside the remote farmhouse of Heol Fanog during the Easter of 1989 was occupied by an English family along with all their worldly possessions. For Bill and Liz Rich, this move represented the dawn of a new life together. They had recently wed, and Liz was several months pregnant with their first child. Also joining them was 14-year-old Lawrence, Bill's son from a previous marriage. The stunning views that surrounded the farmhouse had been a key factor in the couple's decision to live there, easily lending themselves to Bill's work as an artist and sculptor. And in the first days and weeks of moving into their new home, it had seemed like nothing could have spoiled the newfound peace and solitude the family now enjoyed. Bill soon threw himself into the existing artwork orders and commissions that he had brought along with him, whilst Liz set about baby-proofing the house in preparation for their new arrival. However, it was not long after their son Ben had been born in November of that year that the apparent serenity of their new home slowly began to unravel. The first signs that something was amiss would be the family's interactions with Wyn Thomas, the owner of a neighbouring farm which bordered their property. It was obvious that Thomas possessed an underlying resentment of his new English neighbours, one not fully uncommon amongst some members of the local community. But alongside this, the farmer had delivered a series of cryptic and disturbing warnings relating to a derelict building which was situated in the grounds of Heol Fanog. It was the remains of an old manor house which had once stood on the site, a stone skeleton of a building, now fully flooded with a sucking bog of muddy swamp water. Thomas insisted that even before its downfall, the manor house had been a place of misery, and that numerous animals had been found drowned in the mire since that time. Initially, Bill had scoffed at the dramatic assertions of his new neighbour, believing the farmer was trying to intimidate him into moving away. But several weeks later, a bizarre event took place which caused Bill to reassess the warnings the Welshman had given him. In the early hours of one winter morning, he had awoken and then crept along the landing towards the bathroom, taking care not to wake his sleeping wife and baby as he did so. But just as he lifted the seat on the toilet, Bill heard a sudden commotion coming from the other side of the bathroom door, as if someone was running along the upstairs hallway. Stepping back out onto the landing, as the sound of heavy footfalls descended the adjacent staircase, he flipped the light switch so he could identify who was causing the ruckus. But to his amazement, there was nobody there. A quick inspection of the house confirmed that all windows and doors were fully secured. Settling back into bed, Bill asked his wife if she had heard the footsteps, only to be told that she had been fast asleep. Assuming it must have been Lawrence, the only other able-bodied person inside the address, he had settled back to sleep, resolving to raise the issue with his oldest son over breakfast. Little did he realise that this incident would set in motion a chain of events which would go on to endanger the lives of every person living within the remote farmhouse. The following morning, the conversation with Lawrence did not go as well as Bill had either hoped or expected. His son vigorously denied having been the cause of the previous evening's disturbance, saying that like his stepmother, he had not heard the footsteps either. Liz managed to calm their bickering before they were interrupted by the arrival of the postman. However, tension soon flared again when the budding artist opened and inspected the electricity bill that had just arrived. At most, he had expected the cost to be somewhere in the region of £100, only to find a demand for £750. Reasoning that the energy supplier had made a mistake, Bill picked up the telephone. This resulting inquiry quickly turned into another argument, as the operator on the other end of the call insisted that the figures were correct and that no error had been made. With Bill's tone growing increasingly agitated, Liz decided to make her way upstairs and put Ben down for a mid-morning nap. But as she settled into the old armchair by the baby's cot and began to sing a soothing lullaby to her son, the sound of the door crashing open suddenly echoed around the room. Taking hold of her crying infant and turning to scold whichever of the two men had entered the room in such a disruptive way, Liz was horrified to see the door still firmly closed from when she had entered. Soon after, the family began to experience an ever-increasing series of disturbing events. Both Bill and Liz would regularly be disturbed from what they were doing by the sounds of heavy footsteps making their way through the house, only for them to find that there was nobody there. With Lawrence at school and Ben fast asleep in his cot upstairs, this was an entirely unsettling experience which neither of them could explain. Alongside this, mysterious activity began to take place around the property's electricity meter, which was also located in the hall near to where the footsteps had been heard. Sometimes it would produce a heavy whirring sound that gradually increased in volume until it seemed to be saturating every room in the house, before abruptly ceasing. This would sometimes be accompanied by an overpowering smell of sulphur, which forced the couple to open all the windows to get rid of the sickening stench. Despite several visits from electricians and engineers, the meter was always found to be in perfect working order. Successive electricity bills only seemed to increase in cost, almost as if Bill and Liz were operating every device inside their property at the same time, day after day. As these unsettling phenomena continued to escalate, an increasingly frustrated Bill finally heeded the warnings of Wyn Thomas and asked him for more information. Although initially reluctant to engage with his neighbour, it soon became clear to Thomas that Bill was struggling to cope with whatever was taking place. After a time, his attitude towards the Englishman softened and prompted him to open up regarding the history of the property. He eventually explained that the farmhouse had been built by the original owners using rubble and stones from the ruins of the old manor house. This discarded masonry had included broken and smashed gravestones from family members who had long been buried in the surrounding grounds. The locals believed that similar issues reported by previous occupants of Heol Fanog were due to the wrath of the spirits who had been disturbed by the desecration of their resting place. Over time, the bizarre activity only seemed to escalate further for the Rich family. In addition to the heavy footfalls, which would make their way down the stairs before terminating in the hall, a second set of footsteps now began to manifest. This new disturbance was more of a soft, shuffling gait, as if someone wearing slippers or socks was progressing slowly across the carpets of the upstairs rooms. At the same time, a new smell also began to occur alongside the other sulphury stench, which elicited a sharp and metallic taste of burning incense. Various rooms in the house would also experience sudden localized changes in temperature, becoming either unbearably hot or freezing cold, but only for a few minutes each time. Liz confided to Bill that when he was away from the property, she would catch movements out the corner of her eye in certain rooms, only to then turn and find nobody there. She had developed an overwhelming feeling that someone or something was residing at the address with them, suspecting that it was silently watching their every move and choosing to reveal itself on occasion, as if to gauge the reactions to its presence. One evening, a pig that the family had purchased some months before and which stayed outside in the barn suddenly began to shriek and squeal in the middle of the night. It became aggressive, attacking Bill when he tried to calm or feed it, eventually biting him and having to be put down by the local vet. This madness seemed to pass from animal to animal, as a series of family pets and livestock each erupted into violent acts against their masters. Then suddenly, whatever had affected the animals seemed to turn its attention to Lawrence, who became increasingly withdrawn and resentful of his father. The teenager would spend all his time in his room or away from the house, and reacted with an almost supernatural rage whenever he was confronted about his actions. He would violently lash out and spit at Bill and other family members when they attempted to calm him. The tone of his voice would deepen to the point that it no longer sounded like his own, more as if someone or something was speaking through him. Over time, Bill's mood also began to sour, with it becoming increasingly difficult for him to produce the work for his clients. And as the electricity bills continued to rise, with little money available to pay for them, he turned to alcohol as a means of coping with their situation. One afternoon, amidst all this chaos, Liz was returning home from a walk with Ben when she got an overpowering sensation that she was being watched. As her gaze had lifted to the window of Ben's nursery, she saw the figure of an old lady standing there staring back at her. Her face was completely blank, with no features. Hurrying in through the kitchen, Liz ran straight upstairs and pushed her way into the nursery, only to find it empty. The only thing she discovered was a choking smell of burning incense, which began to fade away the second she opened the door. Unable to rely on Bill, Liz began to reach out to people in the nearby town in search of any clue as to what might be causing this upheaval. Through inquiries with a local historian, Bethan Morgan, she was able to find pictures in old newspapers of the people who had lived at Heol Fanog before them, positively identifying the old lady she had seen standing in the nursery as Marion Holborn. She was a previous owner of the address who had died of cancer over a decade before. Liz went on to unearth more stories associated with the property, which she had not been aware of at the point she and her husband had signed the lease. A local vet named Liz Jones confided to her that she too had heard strange and sinister footsteps in the house when she had treated animals there in the past. A plumber who had attended the property to repair their toilet also related a strange story from when Marion Holborn had still been alive and had asked him to fix radiators to the walls. Upon completing the job, he had gone home, only to get a call that evening from Mrs. Holborn telling him that all of the radiators had fallen off the walls and onto the floor. Returning to Heol Fanog, the bewildered tradesman found that they had indeed all been torn from their fittings. He subsequently reattached them with stronger brackets, only to receive a further call from Mrs. Holborn the next day, telling him that the radiators had once again been detached from the walls. This left him wondering if the old woman was playing some sort of prank on him, or if someone was perhaps playing a prank on her. During the summer of 1990, the long-suffering couple were surprised by an unexpected knock on their front door. They opened it to find a well-dressed man in his 50s smiling back at them, with two other figures standing a short distance away. The man would go on to introduce himself to the Rich family as Larry Harry, a renowned psychic, and the first of several unannounced visitors to Heol Fanog, all of whom would attempt to shine a light on what was taking place there. And in doing so, they would end up only casting the family deeper into the darkness they faced. Join us on Halloween for part 2.